Recently on this channel, we ranked every one of the 64 songs of Steely Dan's classic period, from 1972 to 1980. But we didn't discuss the Dan's two reunion albums from the early 2000s. So let's talk about those. Hey there, Swan Shadow here. Welcome back to the nest. In our Steely Dan 64 project, you'll find links to the playlist in the description below. We covered all of the songs from the 7 classic period albums of the legendary Steely Dan, Donald Fagen and Walter Becker. However, as you probably know, Becker and Fagen reunited after 2 decades of working on their own solo projects to create a pair of all-new studio albums. The first, Two Against Nature, was released in 2000. The second and final collaboration, Everything Must Go, appeared 3 years later. When I developed my initial ranking, I intentionally left out the songs on these 2 later albums. As I said at the time, I haven't spent as much time listening to these 2 records as I have the initial 7, and therefore I don't feel the same connection to them as I do the earlier material. However, I promised that we'd look at these albums at a future time, and, well, that time has arrived. So let's talk first about Two Against Nature. Its release in 2000 followed Gaucho, the last album of Steely Dan's classic period, by exactly 20 years. Two Against Nature arrived to much critical acclaim, and it won 4 Grammy Awards. Album of the Year, beating out Eminem, Radiohead, Beck, and a really dreadful album by Paul Simon. Best Pop Vocal Album, Best Engineered Album of the non-classical variety, and also the song Cousin Dupree won for Best Pop Performance by a Duo or Group with Vocals. The album peaked at number 6, I Am Not a Number, I Am a Free Man, on the Billboard album chart, and certified platinum, meaning it sold over 1 million copies. I bought one. Two Against Nature is a really solid album. You'll have to wait for our upcoming album ranking video to see exactly where I would place it in the Steely Dan canon, but suffice it to say that it holds up to a fair portion of the classic period records. It's not a perfect album. It's probably the first Steely Dan album since Pretzel Logic that I would make that statement about. But it has definitely grown on me over time. In fact, I enjoy it a great deal more today than I did 25 years ago when it first came out, when I was holding it against the impossibly high standard of the classic period albums, in particular the last 4. I think it's aged well. It doesn't feel stuck in time like music can sometimes do. Like those legendary late 70s albums, Two Against Nature could just as well have been recorded today as a quarter century ago. So it definitely makes a worthy addition to the Steely Dan discography. There are 9 tracks on Two Against Nature. Track number 1 is Gaslighting Abbey, a typically dark number about a man plotting with his mistress to do away with his wife. Yeah, I know. One thing you quickly notice about this album lyrically is that it isn't cheerful. That is signature Steely Dan, but it goes to 11 on this album, starting with this song. In terms of musicianship, though, this track is razor sharp and drumhead tight. That's the great Ricky Lawson on drums, by the way, and Tom Barney on bass, forming yet another of the Dan's fantastic rhythm sections. Walter Becker, whom we heard more frequently on bass during the classic period, plays guitar here and gets in a nicely understated solo. It's a pretty good song. However, Fagen's vocal feels a bit disconnected from the music for some reason, just to my ear. Track number 2 is What a Shame About Me. It's a nice little hook to this one. Becker again on guitar doing some tasty licks. Another song that clocks in at over 5 minutes. That's more or less a theme on this album. But it doesn't overstay its welcome. This one holds my attention. Next up is the album's title song, Two Against Nature. This one is catchy and irresistibly groovy, but for some reason it strikes me as being a little bit busy for the sake of busyness. Is it possible for there to be too much going on in a Steely Dan track? If so, this may be the one that proves it. Maybe just one or two fewer elements might have been addition by subtraction, but again, that's just my ear. On the positive side, this track features one of my favorite drummers, Keith Carlock, and he does some very stylish work here. Jamie Runaway is the fourth track. As opposed to the previous number, the sparser arrangement on this song makes it feel more classic and impactful. Fagen's vocal seems more present here. Chris Potter kicks in with a great sax solo. He contributes some fine work on several tracks on this album. Song number 5, Almost Gothic, clocks in with a seriously cool vibe. Oh man, I was not going to use that word. And it's also got some first-rate lyrics from Becker and Fagen. For whatever reason, this one has a real Katy Lied feel to me. I think it would have been right at home on that album. I dig the light touch that Fagen uses on the vocal here. And speaking of songs that would have fit perfectly on classic period albums, Jack of Speed, the 6th track, could have slid straight onto Gaucho and not downgraded it at all. It's got a super sweet bounce to it. It's funky and jazzy, but not over the top in any respect. This one might be the best song on the album. Track number 7 is the Grammy-winning single, Cousin Dupree, about a second-rate traveling musician macking on his suddenly maturing young female cousin. Yeah, that is creepy, but you know, in a Steely Dan kind of way. To me, there's something a bit, I don't know, self-conscious about this one. The lyrics are right up there with the funniest in the whole Becker-Fagen catalog, but I find the music maybe just a little bit repetitive. Not that that's bad, it's a catchy groove, but just in comparison with earlier material, it doesn't have the same intricacy of changes. But again, it's one of the more memorable tunes on the album. The 8th track is titled Negative Girl, and according to Rolling Stone magazine's recent ranking of Steely Dan songs, it's the worst song in the entire Steely Dan discography. Okay, I quite frankly don't hear it that way. I think it's better than some of the lesser tracks on side 2 of Pretzel Logic, for example, and it's definitely better than a few of the songs on Everything Must Go, which we're going to get to. It's not a bad song, but admittedly it's a bit of a throwaway. I do like the nice little vibraphone solo by Dave Shank and the distinctive drumming by percussion legend Vinnie Colaiuta. The rest of it, kind of forgettable. Clearly Becker and Fagen thought so because neither of them bothered to play an instrument on it. Two Against Nature ends with West of Hollywood, which, for the record, West of Hollywood is just West Hollywood. Anyway, this, in my opinion, is a really fine track that would have been improved by an edit. At 8 minutes and 22 seconds, by far the longest cut in Steely Dan history, it overstays its welcome by about a minute and a half. The highlight is an absolutely epic sax solo by Chris Potter. Again, I could have used a little bit less of it. It goes on ever so slightly too long. It's always better to leave the audience wanting more than to give them a little more than they wanted, which might be the best way to describe the 9th and final studio album from Steely Dan, Everything Must Go. But we're going to talk about that one next time. I'm taking my own advice. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Steely Dan's Two Against Nature. Do you dig it? Not dig it? Semi-dig it? Love to hear your impressions about this album. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, consider tapping the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so that YouTube will tell you when we've got more content for you. We sincerely appreciate your support in all of these ways. Part 2 on the way. Until then, be well and stay steely. You know the drill. Is there gas in the car? Yes, there's gas in the car.